You don't realize the moment your old life ends. There's no dramatic music, no slow-motion exit, no cinematic closure. It ends quietly. One ordinary morning, you wake up in a room that doesn't feel like yours. The silence is different, heavier, permanent. The air itself feels unfamiliar, and that's when it hits you. You're alone, not temporarily alone, not peacefully alone, but structurally alone. The system you built your identity around is gone. And no one prepared you for the psychological aftershock that follows. For most men, divorce isn't just the loss of a partner, it's the collapse of a role. For years, your life had a structure. You were needed, expected, positioned. Even if the relationship was strained, even if love had faded, your mind was anchored to a mission: provide, protect, endure. But when divorce finalizes, that mission disappears overnight. And without a mission, a man doesn't just lose direction, he loses gravity. He starts floating in his own life, disconnected from purpose, disconnected from certainty, disconnected from himself. At first, the world doesn't notice. You still wake up, you still go to work, you still perform the surface rituals of a functioning adult. But internally, something fundamental has shifted. Your mind replays conversations. Your nervous system stays alert for threats that no longer exist. You question everything, not just the relationship, but your judgment, your instincts, your value. You start wondering if the person you thought you were was an illusion. What makes this phase more dangerous is that society doesn't give men emotional permission to collapse. There is no structured recovery process. No one gathers around you and says, "This is going to break you," before it rebuilds you. Instead, there's an unspoken expectation that you should move on quickly. Be strong, be stoic, be unaffected. But suppression doesn't eliminate damage. It buries it alive. And buried damage reshapes your personality from underneath. In the early months, the silence becomes your primary opponent. Nights stretch longer than they used to, not because of insomnia, but because of confrontation. There's no distraction powerful enough to prevent your mind from reviewing your life in brutal detail. Every compromise, every moment you stayed quiet when you should have spoken, every time you abandoned yourself to maintain peace. You begin to see patterns that were invisible while you were inside the relationship. This is when the first unexpected realization emerges. Divorce doesn't just expose the truth about the relationship. It exposes the truth about you. It reveals where you tolerated disrespect, where you overinvested without reciprocation, where you confused endurance with strength. Many men believed strength meant staying no matter what. But after divorce, you realize strength might have meant leaving sooner. There's a painful irony here. While inside the marriage, you slowly adapted yourself to preserve stability. You minimized your needs, you softened your boundaries, you prioritized harmony over authenticity. You told yourself it was maturity, responsibility, loyalty. But after divorce, you see the cost. You didn't just lose a partner. You lost parts of yourself piece by piece over years, quietly, without noticing. And now, in the absence of that relationship, those missing parts begin to resurface. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even frightening, because you don't recognize yourself anymore. You don't know what you actually enjoy. You don't know what you truly want. Your decisions feel unfamiliar. Your freedom feels suspicious. You've been psychologically conditioned to operate within constraints, and now those constraints are gone. This is where most men make their first mistake. They rush to replace the void. They chase distractions, new relationships, constant social stimulation, anything to avoid facing the emptiness directly. But emptiness isn't your enemy. Emptiness is a diagnostic tool. It reveals what was artificially filling your life. It exposes the difference between genuine fulfillment and temporary occupation. As weeks turn into months, another realization surfaces. The identity you built during marriage was partially constructed around external validation. Being a husband gave you psychological certainty. It gave you social positioning. It gave you a defined role. Without that role, you're forced to confront your raw, unfiltered self. And this confrontation is uncomfortable because it removes illusions. You begin to notice how much of your behavior was driven by fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being alone. These fears shaped your decisions more than logic did. They influenced how much you tolerated, how much you compromised, how much you suppressed. Divorce removes the illusion that those compromises guaranteed security. It reveals that sacrificing yourself does not necessarily protect you. At this stage, anger often appears. Not explosive anger, but cold, analytical anger. Anger at yourself for ignoring warning signs. Anger at the illusion of permanence. Anger at the years you invested believing effort alone could stabilize something fundamentally unstable. This anger, if understood correctly, becomes fuel. It sharpens your perception. It strengthens your boundaries. It prevents future self-betrayal. But anger alone is not transformation. Anger is only the ignition phase. The deeper transformation begins when acceptance emerges. Acceptance that the past cannot be renegotiated. Acceptance that closure is not given by the other person. It is constructed internally. This is where psychological independence begins to form. You start making decisions without considering how they will be perceived. You start speaking without filtering every thought for approval. You start prioritizing your own internal alignment. At first, this feels unnatural, even selfish. But it's not selfish. It's structural correction. It's the rebuilding of psychological sovereignty. One of the most surprising realities men discover after divorce is how much mental energy was consumed maintaining emotional equilibrium inside the relationship, monitoring moods, avoiding triggers, managing tension. After divorce, that constant vigilance disappears, and with it, a new kind of mental clarity emerges. Your thoughts become quieter, more precise, more self-directed. This clarity reveals something unexpected. You were stronger than you thought. You survived psychological environments that slowly drained you. You endured uncertainty without collapsing. You carried emotional weight without recognition. And now, without those burdens, your nervous system begins recalibrating. Your confidence doesn't return immediately. It rebuilds in fragments, through small decisions, small victories, small moments where you choose yourself without hesitation. Confidence after divorce is different from confidence before marriage. It's not based on external validation. It's based on internal consistency. You start noticing patterns in other people more quickly. You recognize emotional manipulation earlier. You sense instability sooner. You no longer ignore discomfort to maintain temporary peace. Your perception becomes sharper because pain has refined your awareness. There's also an unexpected shift in how you experience solitude. In the beginning, solitude felt like punishment, evidence of failure. But over time, solitude becomes neutral, then comfortable, then powerful, because solitude removes negotiation. It removes compromise. It allows uninterrupted alignment between your actions and your intentions. This is where most men experience their second awakening. They realize they were never truly afraid of being alone. They were afraid of being without identity. Divorce forced them to rebuild identity from internal foundations rather than external roles. This rebuilding process changes how you move through the world. Your decisions become slower but more precise. You become less reactive, more observant, less eager to prove yourself, more focused on understanding yourself. You stop seeking approval from environments that never rewarded authenticity. There is also a profound shift in emotional resilience. Before divorce, emotional threats felt destabilizing. After divorce, you've already experienced structural collapse. Smaller disruptions no longer intimidate you. Your nervous system has recalibrated its definition of threat. You've survived worse. But perhaps the most unexpected reality is this. Divorce, while destructive, removes illusions, and illusions are expensive. They cost time, energy, identity. When illusions collapse, reality becomes visible, and reality, while harsh, is efficient. It allows accurate decision-making. Many men eventually realize that the end of the marriage was not the end of their life. It was the end of a version of themselves that no longer aligned with who they were becoming. Divorce didn't just remove a partner. It removed constraints that were preventing evolution. This doesn't mean divorce is painless. The grief remains. Certain memories retain emotional weight. Certain moments still trigger reflection. But the grief changes form. It becomes informational rather than destructive. It becomes something you carry, not something that carries you. Over time, you stop measuring your life by what was lost. You start measuring it by what is now possible. Possibility returns slowly. Through regained autonomy, regained clarity, regained self-trust. You begin constructing a life that reflects who you actually are, rather than who you were expected to be. Your standards become clearer. Your boundaries become non-negotiable. Your identity becomes internally anchored rather than externally assigned. And here is the final realization most men never expect. The man who emerges after divorce is not the same man who entered marriage. He is more aware, more selective, more psychologically independent. He no longer confuses attachment with alignment. He no longer sacrifices identity for temporary stability. He understands something now that he couldn't understand before. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the absence of internal contradiction. And for the first time in years, his internal world is no longer negotiating with itself. He moves forward not with bitterness but with precision, not with desperation but with control, not with illusion but with clarity. And in that clarity, he discovers something unexpected. He didn't lose his life. He got it back,